That's the opposite of what people say, that capitalism incentivizes innovation. Maybe in its early years in some ways, although it's still irrational, and although, the Soviet Union and China using economic planning still industrialized faster than capitalism could. Um, it does breed innovation in some ways, in that if you find an innovative way to produce, right, if you're able to improve a machine in the Industrial Revolution that produces commodities, you're going to be able to outproduce competitors and make more money while spending less on the cost of labor. So your production costs will go down, and the amount of money you can make and the amount of commodities you can produce will go up. So that innovation's incentivized. But as capitalism reaches its monopoly stage, it becomes the opposite. Companies try and prevent innovation so they can be the only commodity producer on the market. Capitalism breeds a $10 package of eggs. Yes, and that's the other thing is competition forces prices down, right? Competition makes it so capitalists have to keep prices at a certain level. Otherwise, everybody will just go buy commodities from another capitalist, right? If your competitor, if I'm selling eggs at $2 a dozen, and I have a competitor who's selling them at 50 cents a dozen, even if my eggs are superior, a lot of people are going to go buy the cheaper eggs. And I'm probably going to have to drive my price down. And if I drive my price too high, my customers will start to go away, and more customers will go to the other guy's eggs. But if I have a giant egg producing company that also controls all the means of transport and the methods of transporting the eggs to the stores, and I also own a lot of the stores that sell my eggs, and I control basically the entire market for eggs using a giant capitalist conglomerate that works together with the banks and is heavily financed by banks who also profit off this. And I control the entire market for eggs, I can drive prices up much higher, right? Because there's no competitors and there's nobody who can enter the market, right? If anybody wants to compete with me in the insane quantity of eggs that I produce and my control over the stores and the means of transport that are necessary to sell eggs, it's going to cost a lot. The cost of entry into the egg market, the cost of entry to buy the means of production and the labor necessary to produce and sell eggs is going to go up and up and up the more that the market is controlled by conglomerates. So that leads to less competition, less ability for smaller firms to keep up, more monopolization, and thus more artificially inflated prices, meaning prices inflated over commodity prices, inflated over the labor value contained in those commodities, measured in time. And I've been talking about the labor theory of value a lot lately, talking about prices in relation to labor value and labor content, which I didn't used to discuss that much because I didn't know, how to defend the labor theory of value, I guess. Because the thing about the labor theory of value is when Marx is writing about it, when Marx is using it as the basis for his analysis in Capital Volumes 1, 2, and 3, it was the widely accepted economic theory at the time, right? A lot of people today portray the labor theory of value as if it was created by Marx, as if Marx was the first person to come up with this so that he could say capitalism necessitates exploitation. But the labor theory of value was created by the classical economists who were in favor of capitalism. In fact, Adam Smith and David Ricardo were two of the major proponents of it and two of the people who helped develop it and found it as a scientific method of analyzing the economy and analyzing capitalism. And they're considered the fathers of capitalism, right? Adam Smith is still, you'll still have capitalist ideologues today who tell you to read Adam Smith. And it's like, you read Adam Smith, dummy, and then read Marx. It'll be really interesting and you'll come out a socialist. But either way, the labor theory of value stemmed from capitalist political economy, from bourgeois economics. Marx just took the labor theory of value that they created, which did have, a lot, or does have a lot of scientific value to it, and a lot of analytical value. And Marx took it to its conclusions. He finished the analysis. Right? Adam Smith and David Ricardo missed a lot of things in their analysis, which Marx criticizes systematically. and shows not just where they went astray, where they were wrong, but exactly how they went wrong and what misconceptions caused them to go wrong. But he takes this labor theory of value analysis to its conclusions and shows that capitalism necessitates exploitation, right? If all value is created by labor and the capitalists are constantly growing, they're constantly accumulating more and more assets, more and more capital, more and more wealth, then they must be exploiting the labor of workers, right? They must be paying the workers less money than what the workers create, less value than what they create. Otherwise, this accumulation, which is clearly happening, we can see it with our own eyes, would be impossible. So he uses the labor theory of value to prove exploitation, which Adam Smith and David Ricardo, when they were using the labor theory of value, if they ever, got close to saying, or realizing that exploitation was going on in the labor process or production process, they would just explain it away or stop the analysis there, and just be like, and just assume that accumulation and profits were created by the capitalists themselves, when in fact it's created by the labor of workers and then appropriated, stolen by the capitalists. So neoclassical economics, which is why I bring up this article, my newest article on midwesternmarx.com, which I'm putting in the chat right now. Neoclassical economics comes about at this point, right? Neoclassical econ comes about as an answer to Marxism, because Marx has taken the labor theory of value, taken classical political economy to essentially its conclusion in many ways. He's answered a lot of the major questions of classical political economy, and he's systematically showed where the classical political economists went astray. So, in order to defend capitalism at this point, you can no longer use the labor theory of value. You accept the labor theory of value, you also accept exploitation, because Marx proved that in Capital. So this is when neoclassical economics comes about, based on the utility theory of value, or what might as well be called the subjective theory of value, where they throw out the labor theory of value completely and claim that the price of products, and thus the value of products, is determined by consumer demand, how much utility the consumer sees in the product, related to the supply of that product in the market. Now, there's no way of proving this, right? All they do is take the price point of a certain commodity, or the average price of a commodity, put it on a graph and draw two lines through it, supply and demand. And there's no way to prove that these lines exist, or quantify these lines in any way, because you can't quantify consumer demand. You can't express it numerically. So the curves are essentially meaningless, and the price point is largely determined by the labor content, or correlated to the labor content within that commodity. But this is the sort of price astrology, the sort of bourgeois capitalist ruling class illusion that's created in order to distract from the fact that Marx had taken classical political economy, the labor theory of value, which does have a lot of analytical and scientific value, and proved capitalist exploitation, and proved that capitalist production is the production of surplus value created by surplus labor, the extra unpaid labor of workers that's stolen from them by the capitalists who own the means of production. So that's basically what this article is about, defending the labor theory of value using the work of Paul Cockshott and others, but especially the work of Paul Cockshott. Talking about how neoclassical economics and this utility theory of value have influenced Marxists in the modern day, especially in the West, and even caused a lot of Marxist economists to dismiss the labor theory of value, right? Claim that labor, when combined with nature, is not the source of all value. And in fact, this utility theory of value is actually correct, even though there's no scientific proof or evidence for it. It's just price astrology, like I said. And there are ways of measuring and testing the labor theory of value scientifically, right? Which is one of the things that makes a theory scientific. It needs to be testable. It needs to be observable. You need to be able to set up data models or data tables, or use hard evidence from the real world, to explain why this model is effective. So that's what Paul Cockshott does here, and I detail it in this article, explaining how labor content measured in time closely correlates to price, and explaining how the demand and supply utility theory of value is unscientific, and is untestable, and therefore Marxist economists should not throw it out. Also, this transition away from classical political economy towards neoclassical political economy that comes post-Marx is based on this subjective theory of value, right? Value is subjective. It's determined by the demand that individuals have for commodities, right? The value of a commodity in the market is just determined by how much people want it. It's determined by the use value of the commodity, even though that's qualitative, even though that is subjective. It's a subjective thing determined by individuals that you can't put a number value on. So there's no way it could determine price, but they claim it determines price. And this fits perfectly with the neoliberal bourgeois ideology and the neoliberal bourgeois culture, and narrative about society, that we're all just individuals. And that there can be no kind of, or nothing that's, no knowledge that's held objectively, no objective truths that are held in common and understood by everybody, no objective analysis, no scientific analysis of society. There's only the individual experiences of individual people who are isolated from each other. That's all that matters, is the individual's demand for consumer goods, for commodities. That's what value is in society. Not labor, not concrete human labor, which can be measured concretely with labor time, or average labor time used to produce certain commodities. So the transition to neoclassical economics is really a transition to subjectivism, individualism, neoliberalism in economics, in order to, or which I call the purest expression of the capitalist ruling class ideology in academia, in the field of economics. It's very, very similar to the purest expression of bourgeois philosophy in the field of philosophy, in the Capitalist Academy in philosophy, which is, postmodernism, or that's what I argue in this this paper. Citing the work of Gabriel Rockhill a lot, and citing the connection and involvement of the CIA and arms of the U.S. State Department and arms of U.S. finance capital. Actually, the State Department resisted postmodernism at first, but later embraced it when the CIA had promoted it and proved that it was successful in promoting capitalism. But either way, postmodernism stresses the idea that there are no meta-narratives, right? There are no objective truths. No objective truths about history or historical development that can be held in common, right? There can be no objective understanding of value, right? We can't understand commonly as a people that labor is what creates value when it's combined with nature. Value is subjective, and it's determined by the subjective desires of individuals. There's nothing objective. The scientific method is no longer the way to observe objective reality, or get as close as we can to understanding objective reality in our minds, because there is no objective reality. It's all just subjective, individualism. This is postmodernism, and it relates directly to this subjective utility theory of value invented by the neoclassical economists to replace classical political economy after Marx destroys it. So that's the article I just finished. I really, really like it. I'm really, really proud of it. I'm sure there's mistakes in it. I want to talk to Dr. Paul Cockshott about the themes in this article and about his work that I cited in this article. And he actually just posted a new lecture on YouTube, which I got like 25 minutes into today, before I had to put it away, sadly, and finish my homework, which then took me 8 hours. But he just published Information Entropy and Capitalist Mass Production, which is about the labor theory of value, the historical development of the labor theory of value, how it came into being, and its scientific or materialist basis. So I'm still learning more about this stuff. And I'm sure, I'll have to write a follow-up to this article at some point. But I'm still really proud of it. I think it's good. I think it, has a lot of good research in it. And then I had Carlos read over the part about postmodernism and philosophy, which, doesn't mean it's perfect. It's not like Carlos has a fully encyclopedic knowledge of philosophy, although he's pretty dang close. But that was the part that I was less comfortable with, because I've studied neoclassical economics in college. I've studied bourgeois right-wing economics in college. My professor was the chairwoman of the local Republican Party in town. So I've studied this kind of economic science, and I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on it. And of course, a pretty decent grasp on Marxism, so I can compare the labor theory of value in Marxist economics to the utility theory of value in neoclassical economics, and also compare that to classical economics, which preceded it. But I didn't have as good or as strong, as dominant of a grasp on the history of philosophy and postmodernism. So that's where Carlos helped me in or came in and helped me out. Honestly, we should have both put our names on this article because we kind of co-wrote it. But yeah, it's I say there's mistakes in it because it's like 35 pages long, and I'm sure I said something in it that was not entirely correct, and people, not a lot of people, but a couple people commented that the title seems editorialized, or the article seems editorialized, and yeah, that was my intention with that article, and I hope I sent it in the chat, but I didn't want to write another academic article. I didn't want to write another, strictly scholarly article, because that's what I've been doing for my healthcare administration graduate program every day, reading really, really, really dry healthcare literature or medical literature, and writing really, really dry academic peer-reviewed articles about healthcare and the administration of healthcare. And there are some really, really good articles, academic articles already, peer-reviewed scholarly stuff from people like Radhika Desai, which I cite in my article about neoclassical economics, that debunks neoclassical economics and shows the value of the labor theory. So I wanted to write something that was more fun to read, that was more concise, that was more editorialized, that, makes it clear what my opinion on this is. That shits on neoclassical political economy and people who are just mouthpieces for the capitalist ruling class. People like Milton Friedman, who claim to be genius academics, but are really just propped up by money from the ruling class, because they're professing this ideology, this academic philosophy that is, or this philosophy of political economy that is the purest expression of the capitalist ruling class. And, also in this article, I say that Alfred Marshall, who's known as the father of neoclassical economics, and the inventor of the supply and demand utility theory of value, I say that he pulled the supply and demand curves out of his ass like 4 times. It says, Cockshot turns the demand curve given by Marshall into an algebraic equation and finds that the points on the curve have no material origin and are entirely senseless, as they were almost surely just made up and drawn arbitrarily by Marshall on a graph. Similar results are deduced in the analysis of the supply curve, showing that without a doubt this entire theory, foundational to the neoclassical school and modern economic thought, was pulled straight out of Alfred Marshall's ass without a shred of real evidence attached to it. So yeah, that's an example of what this article's like if you read the whole thing. Like I said, I wanted to explain neoclassical econ and postmodern philosophy in a way that's entertaining and quick and easily digestible, partially because too, and I mentioned this in the article, I made a whole segment on it. I thought about leaving it out, but I was like, no, it's important, even though it has to do with TikTok and it's kind of silly. But there on TikTok, of course, there were a lot of young people from working class families who were drawn to Marxism and who I was reaching with Marxist political and economic education. But there were also all these things like the neo-Marxists, right? There was this neo-Marxist TikTok hype house. It was called a hype house. And it was just a bunch of kids talking about neo-Marxism, which is basically postmodernism. Thinkers like Derrida and Foucault and A lot of these French thinkers or critical theorists, Horkheimer and Adorno, people like that. And there were also these people who called themselves post-leftists, right? We're leftists, we're Marxists, and that we embrace Marx's method of analysis, but we reject socialism, right? We think there's no hope and that capitalism will reign forever. And these people took a lot of the energy away from the class conscious young people, the young people from working families who were interested in Marxism, because the post leftists and the neo Marxists would be super condescending, right? And they would be super insulting. And they would make fun of people for believing in the labor theory of value, or, buying into Marx's meta narrative about class struggle being what drives history. Or reject the labor theory of value. Maybe I already said that. But basically claiming to be Marxist while not actually being Marxist, while, being neoliberals in principle. And this is what Gabriel Rockhill dissects in his stuff about postmodernism in the Frankfurt School, which I love so much. And that was like a final piece of the puzzle for me, right? Because I never understood what these neo-Marxists were really saying, or what these post-leftists were saying. Or I understood kind of what they were saying, but I didn't see the truth in it. I didn't see, it didn't help me explain the world. Their philosophies and theories didn't help explain the world the way Lenin's imperialism does. And I didn't understand why they would scoff at the work of someone like Lenin for being too simplistic and not complex enough. Not as intelligent as the stuff thought up in a CIA-funded think tank somewhere in France. So when Rockhill showed that this philosophy, is just pseudo-leftism, pseudo-socialism, pseudo-Marxism, pretending to advocate for the working class while actually advocating neoliberalism, giving the aesthetic of being radical while supporting the existing ruling class, it was the last piece of the puzzle for me. And it helped me to inform a lot of young people interested in Marxism and explain to them that these neo-Marxists and these postmodernists and these post-leftists were essentially just neoliberals masquerading as Marxists, and there was no reason to listen to everything they said or second guess yourself just because they're super condescending towards working people and working class conscious Marxists. So that is why I wrote this article. Because not only, are the postmodernists and neo-Marxists like that, not only do they discourage people from getting into Marxism, but neoclassical economics and libertarians do that as well, right? They mock people for believing in the labor theory of value. They mock people for believing that Marx proved exploitation, or that Marx said anything valuable, or that his work is still relevant today. And it is still relevant today. Of course, Marx did prove exploitation. Of course, the labor theory of value does still have scientific use and analytical uses today, much more so than any of the analytical models like the utility theory of value devised by the neoclassicals. But, the neoclassicals are funded by a bunch of corporate NGOs and a bunch of Koch brothers think tanks who are also controlling or influencing a lot of the academies, a lot of the colleges, the universities who produce information and scholarly work and theories of political economy and politics. So they're able to, silence a lot of Marxists and act condescendingly towards Marxists without a lot of scientific value backing up their own theories, right? Without a lot to defend the substance of their theories, of which there's little. So again, that's the reason I wrote that article about postmodernism and neoclassical economics. So people newly getting into Marx, or people who have been getting into Marxism for a while, but have been confused about neoclassical economics promoted by libertarians, or postmodernism promoted by post-leftists. Now you'll be able to distinguish that from Marxism, orthodox Marxism. Postmodern neo-Marxist, yes. This is how you can learn about those postmodern neo-Marxists Jordan Peterson's been warning you about. And you'll actually learn that postmodernism is the opposite of Marxism, or totally different than Marxism. And Jordan Peterson is a liar. He's not a liar. I think he's just, well, no, he is a liar. But I think in that case, he's just confused.